Okay, think about launching a spacecraft. Mission control gives it that huge push, all that guidance to get it going.
Right, the initial thrust.
Exactly. But then, eventually, the astronauts are the ones flying it. They take over navigation. But mission control doesn't just, hang up, do they? They're still watching, offering feedback, ready to help out.
That's a really great picture for what we're talking about today, mentoring a movement.
Yeah, just because you launch something doesn't mean you just drop it and walk away.
No, absolutely not. That initial energy, it's crucial, of course, but it's the sustained guidance, that longer-term support that really allows something to last and multiply.
So that's our mission for this deep dive, right?
Yeah.
To really understand that role, the long-term mentoring needed for lasting impact.
Exactly. And we're drawing on insights from someone who's been, right in the thick of it, training people, watching these movements grow, especially looking back at patterns from the early church.
Okay, so let's dig into that. Paul's ministry seems like a key example in the source material.
It really is. I mean, over maybe 8 to 10 years, he was involved in starting churches all across the Roman Empire. You've got Cyprus, Phrygia, Galatia, Macedonia, Achaia, Asia, maybe even further.
That's a huge area in a relatively short time.
It is. And what's interesting is how differently he operated in different places, time-wise.
Yeah, the material mentions, 3 years in Ephesus?
Yeah.
And maybe 18 months in Corinth?
Right. Long enough, it suggests, for those places to become sort of established hubs, almost like regional centers.
But then you have places like Galatia, Phrygia, Macedonia, where he might have only been there for weeks or a few months.
Exactly. He had to leave much quicker sometimes.
But movement still started. And this is where it gets really crucial, isn't it? It wasn't just about how long he initially stayed.
That's the core insight, yeah. It wasn't just the initial time commitment, it was the consistent follow-through.
How did he do that?
Well, through return visits when he could, sending trusted people, emissaries, colleagues, and of course, writing letters, lots of letters.
Ah, okay. So maintaining that connection, offering encouragement, guidance.
Exactly. It really shows that launching something isn't like a single event. It's an ongoing relationship, an ongoing process.
Which brings us to the big question, I think, the one I had reading this, and you listening might have it too. How long should you stick around, with a group you're training or some new thing you're helping start?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the source tackles it head-on. The answer, it argues, really hangs on what your goal is.
Okay.
If you just want to, kick something off, maybe a shorter time is okay. But if the vision is bigger, if you're aiming for something that replicates, that multiplies across generations, well, then the timeline looks different.
Right. And this is where that P4T GoAL comes in, aiming for at least 4 generations of trainers and churches. Why 4 generations specifically? What's the magic in that number?
Well, it's less magic and more of a diagnostic indicator, The source explains that seeing consistent 4th-generation growth, so the people you trained train others, who train others, who train others, and it keeps going. That's a really strong sign that a self-sustaining movement, a CPM, has actually taken root.
Okay, so it means it's not dependent on the original starter anymore.
Exactly. It shows the core principles, the DNA of it, have been passed on effectively and are now spreading organically within new networks. It's about genuine replication.
Okay, let's try and picture that. You start with Generation 0, right? The people you initially train. They go out and reach the first new believers. That's G1.
Right.
Now, the material makes a point that just doing, say, a 6-week training up front, that might only get you to G1.
That's often the case, yeah.
Yeah.
The example the source uses walks through, I think it's about an 18-month time frame to show the whole process.
18 months.
Yeah, because even if G starts G1 fairly quickly, getting those G1 folks to then effectively train and launch G2, and then G2 launching G3, there are hurdles at each stage.
It's not automatic.
Definitely not. The example showed, it might take several months just for G1 to start producing G2 consistently. People are learning, facing challenges, needing support.
So each new generation needs that ongoing encouragement and mentoring.
Absolutely. And critically, G needs help learning how to mentor G1 effectively. Then G1 needs support as they learn to mentor G2, and so on.
So it's not just about the content. It's about passing on the ability to mentor and guide others.
Precisely. That longer engagement period, that 9 to 18 months, allows for that transfer of skill and vision. It's about helping the first group learn how to nurture the ones that follow. If you really want thoroughness, lasting impact, you need that longer view.
Okay, that really highlights why just counting, the number of new groups isn't the full picture.
Right.
The son of mentioned that story about the colleague, remember? Seeing lots of new churches, which sounds great.
Yeah. On the surface, fantastic results.
But they hadn't thought about tracking them by generation.
Exactly.
Huh.
Until they asked that sort of diagnostic question, okay, that's great, but how many are first gen, how many are second, third, and how many are fourth generation or beyond?
That question changes everything, doesn't it?
It really does, because it shifts the focus from just addition, adding new groups, to multiplication, and crucially, sustainability. Like the material says, you don't really have a movement, a CPM, until you're consistently seeing those fourth gen plus results.
It gives you a concrete metric, a way to actually gauge the depth.
Exactly.
But it's not only about multiplying groups, is it? There's another big piece to this longer time frame.
Yes, absolutely. The second key reason our source gives for that longer mentorship is developing solid leaders.
Okay.
Because these movements, at their core, aren't just church planting movements. They have to be leadership multiplication movements, too.
Right. Multiplying leaders within those churches.
Precisely. That 9 to 18-month period is also vital for nurturing strong, capable leaders at every level, every generation.
And the source connects this to that 3/3 meeting structure. Specifically the pastoral care part.
Yeah, the 3/3 is just a common meeting format people use, looking back, looking up, looking forward. But that looking back or pastoral care section where people check in and share struggles and successes, that's where a lot of organic leadership development happens.
How does that work? How do the issues change over time?
Well, think about that initial group G. In the first few weeks or months, the how are you doing questions bring up very personal stuff, right?
Like basic discipleship things, finding time to pray, overcoming habits, maybe relationship issues.
Exactly, foundational stuff. But then, fast forward maybe 6 months, the movement's hopefully started, G1 exists. Now the how are you doing brings up different things.
Like what?
Like, okay, how do I actually lead this new group? How do we make sure people are following through? We're trying to share our faith, but we're facing pushback. Maybe feeling overwhelmed with the new responsibility. Practical leadership challenges.
Okay, makes sense. And then even later, say 9 or 10 months in.
Now the issues get even more layered. G leaders might start bringing up challenges with their downline leaders in G1 or G2. Things like someone in a G2 group is struggling with sin, or this G1 leader isn't seeing multiplication happen, or how do I encourage my leaders when they get discouraged?
Wow, yeah. Maybe even dealing with weird teachings popping up, or theological questions they can't answer, or leaders burning out.
Exactly. All those real-world leadership challenges. And the point is, by consistently having that space, that pastoral care time, asking, how are you doing? You're providing real-time, on-the-job leadership coaching.
So it's not theoretical training, it's learning by doing with support.
Yes. You're helping them solve problems, establishing healthy patterns, modeling how to care for other leaders. The source links it right back to Paul writing to Timothy and Titus. He was mentoring them as they led others.
So that thoroughness we talked about earlier, it also means building the capacity for the whole thing to sustain itself through homegrown leaders.
That's the heart of it.
Now, some people might worry, that this kind of rapid growth, trying to multiply leaders quickly, could it be shallow?
That's a common concern, yeah. But the source actually references Ephesians 4, making the point that believers often mature fastest when they're immediately involved in serving and using their gifts.
Learning by doing again.
Right. And it also mentions how this T4T approach, the idea of training every believer to be a trainer, kind of unintentionally solved a problem seen in some earlier movements.
Which was?
The problem of leadership overload, where everything depended on a few key super spreaders.
Yeah.
When everyone is equipped and expected to train others, the leadership base is much broader and more resilient.
That's interesting. Distributes the load.
Exactly. And it mentions some people even prefer using the word trainer instead of leader sometimes.
Why is that?
To sort of de-emphasize status or pride and focus on the function.
Right.
You receive something, you pass it on. It's about the flow.
It sounds a lot like what Paul did, really. Developing leaders pretty quickly by giving them real jobs to do.
And then providing that ongoing support and direction, yeah.
The source even lists that whole team Paul had with him at the end of his third journey, remember? Sopater, Aristarchus, Candace, Gaius, Timothy.
Tychicus, Trophimus, yeah. And the point was, these guys represented movements that had started on his earlier journeys.
So real homegrown leaders rising up from within the movements themselves.
Exactly, that's the goal. Not dependence on the outside person, but cultivating that internal leadership capacity. Paul modeled it, provided a method, and coached them along the way.
Okay, so wrapping this up, the two big reasons for that longer, say, 9 to 18-month mentorship period
Are first, to see that consistent fourth generation plus multiplication happening, showing it's truly self-sustaining.
and second, to develop solid, capable leaders at every level.
Right. It comes back to that idea. Launch, yes, but don't just drop it. Guide it, mentor it, but don't control it. Let the spirit lead through those local leaders.
It's about investing for the long haul, isn't it?
It really is. If you want true, lasting impact, it seems you need that intentional, longer-term engagement to build both the breadth of multiplication and the depth of leadership.
So maybe something for you listening to think about. Look at the things you're involved in, the groups or initiatives. What would launching but not dropping actually look like in your context?
Yeah, what steps could you take to deliberately foster both multiple generations of impact and strong, sustainable leadership from within?
And maybe, just maybe, start to track the generations of impact. How might that simple shift give you some really valuable new insights, something to chew on as we finish this deep dive?